All right. Hello, everyone. So we're ready to start. Thank you so much for joining our climate and energy webinar as part of our Common Agenda education series. This webinar will be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel to be shared widely. We'll answer any and all questions at the end of each subchapter section, so please feel free to put in any questions you have in the Q&A chat at the bottom. This is 501c3 and is intended as an education on strong conservation policy. We recognize that it's an election year, but for the purposes of our educational series, we are not engaging in conversations about specific or general legislation or bills. Now, I'll pass it on to Lillian, our Clean Energy and Climate Justice Manager here at VCN.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Andriana. My name is Lillian, and I'm VCN's Clean Energy and Climate Justice Policy and Campaigns Manager. And I have the honor today of introducing some of the authors of the policy papers in the Climate and Clean Energy section of the 2024 Common Agenda. So our first chapter here is about decarbonizing the grid. First, we will hear from Blair St. Ledger-Olson from Climate Cabinet Action on achieving 100% clean energy. Then we'll hear from Nate Benforado on participating in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And at the end of this section, we will have time for questions. So if you have questions for Blair or Nate while they're presenting, please go ahead and type those questions in the Q&A box. And with that, I will pass it off to Blair to get us started.
So, like I said, this is the Achieving 100% Clean Energy, and I want to talk to you guys about these policy recommendations. This is a new paper, and it came to fruition because we found a lot of confusion, maybe even internally, but really externally with our lawmakers about what was actually in the Clean Economy Act. What did the Clean Economy Act allow for when we passed it in 2020? Particularly about things like nuclear, for instance. So we ended up having a lot of conversations this past session oriented around the Clean Economy Act already does that, and you don't need to pass a bill for that. Whether or not that was preserving reliability and affordability authority within the SEC, whether or not that allowed for existing nuclear systems within the existing Clean Economy Act framework. These were conversations that kept happening over and over again. So we decided a paper to sort of go through what indeed the Clean Economy Act does allow for, doesn't allow for, as a good refresher. The other things that started to come up in particular when it came to the SEC was about how risks were born. And later today on this same call, you'll hear me talk about unproven technologies at scale. So if you want to hear about hydrogen and small modular reactors, stick around and I will talk about that in a different section. But at least for right now, we're going to stick with this paper, but they're very intersectional because they get to the Advanced Clean Economy or the Virginia Clean Economy Act already leaves room for technological advancements moving forward. But stick around for that one, and I'll talk to you all about infuriating and annoying things that we heard this past session and even at the Clean Energy Summit. So like right now, let's talk about what does the Clean Economy Act do? So we need to maintain the mandatory fossil fuel retirement schedule. A lot of things that we heard about this past session were about whether or not Virginia could indeed hit those, whether or not the SEC had the necessary authority, the SEC being Virginia's Public Service Commission, the State Corporation Commission, whether or not the SEC had the needed authority if, for instance, there was an issue with our grid reliability or security, could they defer the retirements in the Virginia Clean Economy Act? The answer is yes, they already have that authority. That code does exist within, I believe it's 585.5. It's either 585.1 or 585.5. But the SEC already does have that authority. If and only if Virginia's grid is jeopardized, the affordability and reliability of Virginia's grid is put into jeopardy by those retirements. So we've got to maintain the mandatory fossil fuel retirement schedule here as policy recommendation number one. Now, we got a lot of questions last session. I keep saying last year, like it's not still the same calendar year. Time is an irrelevant construct as far as I'm concerned these days. But we had a lot of pushback this last session about what different types of things should qualify for renewable energy credits or the VCA incentives. And the answer is that we are defending the VCA against sort of death by 1,000 tiny cuts, whether or not that's renewable landfill methane or expanded biomass, and we'll get to biomass, or things that aren't truly renewable. So really prioritizing that the financial incentives, the things to help the entities that have to comply with the Clean Economy Act, so APCO or Dominion in particular, not the co-ops in Virginia, that those financial incentives are protected for those entities having to comply with specifically proven zero carbon resources that actually are renewable, like solar and wind. So not landfill biomethane. And that's going to be an ongoing fight. We anticipate significant bills to be introduced in this coming legislative session on that issue. The other one, I'm going to just make a nod for and then say, stick around if you're not already sick of hearing my voice to hear about managing technologies unproven at scale, whether or not the SEC currently has authority to protect ratepayers from these big, unproven, maybe a huge part of our clean energy transition, maybe not, technologies. We're going to circle back to that, but it was a very interesting fight. So stay tuned to talk extensively about HB 2333. And I can't see Nate's face, but I'm sure it's groaning. And then the other two that we've got is expanding the role that third party, so PPAs, power purchase agreement, but third party owned and operated clean renewable technology can play in our utility mix. And that also starts to get to as well against defending against unproven technologies, but also ensuring affordability. Clean energy is always the most affordable energy resource, but it also becomes so much more affordable if we don't require our utilities own it. And instead we allow for the PPA structure that we passed in the Clean Economy Act to expand more. And last but not least, and I think Lena is actually going to talk about this later today, so I'm not going to talk too much, but protecting energy efficiency components. And in the Clean Economy Act, that does mean doing a couple tweaks because our original Clean Economy Act only ran up to 2025. So we have some energy efficiency work to do in this upcoming legislative session as well, and Lena will talk more about that. So that's what I've got for you all today. Really, this paper is to help our lawmakers understand what's in the Clean Economy Act, and none of us blame them for not knowing, because sometimes even we have to go and refresh our memory. But we've got 30% new members coming into the General Assembly, regardless of how anything elections go. So having a paper that serves as a level set for everybody about what is in the Clean Economy Act, what does it do, and what are places that we can work to expand or modify or tweak is what we're trying to accomplish with this paper. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to apologize for whatever spreadsheet y'all saw, because I still don't even know what spreadsheet I have up. And I think I'm handing it to Nate. And I'm like, sorry, Nate, for triggering you on SMRs right before yours.
That's all right. I am here to talk about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Thank you, Blair. I'm an attorney here at the Southern Environmental Law Center, and we wrote a paper with our wonderful colleagues, Jay Ford at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Mandy Warner at EDF. So RGGI, aka the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is a critical tool in Virginia's fight to rein in greenhouse gas emissions. Burning fossil fuels to create electricity is a major contributor to climate change. Burning fossil fuels also releases many other harmful pollutants, harming public health, the environment, and it's not great for our wallets either. Fossil fuel prices have been very high the last few years, and they have always been incredibly volatile. And RGGI is a proven tool that will get utilities to reduce their emissions and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. RGGI has been around for a long time, and the data is clear. It reduces carbon emissions, cost effective, it improves public health, it's good for the environment, it helps protect customers from these fossil fuel prices, and it brings in revenue for participating states. Virginia began participating in RGGI following a critical piece of legislation passed in 2020. So we officially joined in 2021. That piece of legislation was called the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act. That law requires Virginia to participate in RGGI. It requires the funds that are generated from the sale of the carbon allowances to be used for two great purposes. First, low-income energy efficiency programs. So this money is helping thousands and thousands of Virginians reduce their energy bills by weatherizing their homes, upgrading appliances, doing duct work, making small repairs so that the homes that otherwise can't be weatherized using federal dollars can finally be weatherized. It's going incredibly well, and there's so much more work to do. Second, the flood fund. So again, this has been very successful. Again, these funds are flowing all across the Commonwealth. They're helping localities assess, plan for, hire expert help, implement solutions to deal with flooding. And it's not just coastal communities. This money is available everywhere in Virginia, and it is being accessed everywhere in Virginia. RGGI, unfortunately, is under attack. Following an executive order from the current administration, the Air Board repealed the regulation this summer that is required to participate in RGGI. So you have the 2020 law, but to actually participate, you need an underlying regulation to set that up. The Air Board has repealed that program. If this action stands, Virginia will no longer be a participant come January 1st, 2024. This obviously was a devastating action. It is also a very unpopular action. New polling came out just this week, and very much consistent with prior polls, 2/3 of Virginians want to stay in RGGI. They know we need these climate solutions, and that's what the people want. Now, I will mention that SELC is working with some fantastic clients to challenge this action in court, and we will be doing everything we can to get this action declared unlawful and keep us in RGGI. But the purpose of this paper is to remind lawmakers that their job is not done. It is absolutely critical that we keep this law on the books, the 2020 Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act. It added new sections of the code to the air pollution control law, the air pollution control law. And so no matter what happens with the lawsuit and the RGGI regulation, maintaining this law is incredibly important to Virginia's future. We have to keep that law on the books. We have to keep that money flowing to these fantastic programs. And so the main purpose of this paper, we're in sort of a confusing situation where we have a law that in our view requires participation. We have a repeal of the underlying regulation. We cannot afford to let lawmakers kind of fall asleep at the wheel here. It is so important that we defend this law. It is, it's just a critical, RGGI itself is a critical tool to addressing climate change. And we need to remind lawmakers that their job is not done. The Air Board has repealed it, but they need to defend the law itself. So that's the purpose of the paper.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate and Blair. Again, if anyone has any questions, please put those into the Q&A box. I'm not seeing any questions right now, but I have a question. I'm curious about how we get to this January date, and let's say the lawsuit is ongoing, as I imagine lawsuits take a long time. What happens at that January cutoff? What happens to those funds? What happens to the regulation while we're in this limbo state?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns, and it's going to depend on the lawsuit. We've got a very busy October and November and early December with the court. And so there's a bunch of preliminary motions, and our goal is to try to maintain our participation in RGGI even while this lawsuit is ongoing. So one of the things that we have requested, but it won't be decided on until probably December, is something called a stay, which effectively pauses the repeal of the regulation, which would mean we would still be in RGGI. So it's going to depend on the court action, but our goal is to try and keep us in RGGI throughout this legal process.
Great. Thank you, Nate. And I'm seeing another question in the chat. Did any municipalities that received funding intervene in the Reggie case? Concerned about standing.
No other groups have intervened formally, but there are opportunities throughout the litigation for interested parties, including localities, including other groups, to try and participate as what's called an amicus or friend of the court, to highlight how important this program is to many aspects of Virginia.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate. Okay, and it looks like that is our only question thus far. So we'll move on to our next chapter of the Common Agenda. We've got our Dirty Energy Infrastructure papers. First, we'll have Dan Holmes with Clean Virginia speaking on surging demand from data centers, followed by Blair again discussing managing technologies unproven at scale. Then we will have Jess Sims with Appalachian Voices speaking to preventing pipeline harms. And again, if you have any questions for these folks on the topics they're presenting, go ahead and pop those in the Q&A box and we'll address those at the end of this section. So with that, I will pass it to Dan.
Hello, everyone. Give me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see the first slide here. So we wrote a paper on surging energy demand from data centers. I wrote this paper with my colleague, Will Cleveland from Southern Environmental Law Center, and I'll just jump right into the issue. So you don't need to read all this text. I'm going to be really brief and just say we have a data center problem here in Virginia. The U.S. has about 10 times the amount of data centers than the next largest market, like country, which would be Germany, actually. And about half of those, a little less than half of those, are sited here in Virginia. Majority of those being in Northern Virginia. But more are coming. We had some information come out of a recent SEC proceeding in which Dominion, late to the game, shared a bunch of information about load requests for service load requests from data centers moving forward. And those numbers were somewhat alarming, but we're also seeing at the local level, on the ground in Virginia, we're seeing a lot more approvals coming through. So we know more load requests are coming. There's also, again, people need to keep in mind that this is currently a favorite form of economic development by many of our politicians on both sides of the aisle. And obviously it does have a lot of economic benefit, but it also creates the need for a lot of infrastructure. And really what we're talking about here is how we meet that infrastructure need and what that means to local communities. Beyond just the energy sector, there's some other impacts that I'll get into briefly. As I mentioned, there is a lot of infrastructure that's required. What we're talking about here is Dominion has suggested through, and as well PJM, our regional transmission authority, has been looking at this issue, and it's suggesting that we're going to see a doubling of our energy demand around 2038, 2040, perhaps even more. There are other analyses that would show that maybe that's not a little extreme. And Dominion has a long track record of trying to overproject energy because they benefit when they have to build things. So they get their return on investment is based on, again, their investment. So the more they build, the richer they get. So just keep that in mind. They have an incentive to say more is needed always. That doesn't take away from the fact that regardless of what that number is, we've got a pretty big surge of energy demand coming our way. And we need to make sure that we're able to protect the Commonwealth's policies and goals as we try to address this issue. Some of the impacts, again, would be generation and transmission from the energy side, but also as it relates to that, who pays for it? Right now, under our current system, we all pay for the infrastructure that's built. So even though one primary user may drive that need or drive that infrastructure, you and I, as ratepayers of Dominion, or if Dominion's providing energy to your co-op or your municipality, you're ending up absorbing some of that cost. There's also other impacts. A lot of these things come with backup diesel generators right now. That's a huge issue with regard to local air quality that people are concerned about. There's water withdrawals for cooling. There's a lot of questions about how we're going to manage this if this becomes the preferred form of economic development for the next decade or two. Some of that I did mention about conflicts with Commonwealth policies and goals, and what I wanted to flag is primarily the impact this could have on our clean energy goals. So Dominion has just filed a plan to meet all of this demand, and let's just say it's not the best plan. There's multiple new natural gas combustion turbines. There's a lot of talk about small modular nuclear reactors. So whether it's air quality or from a cost perspective, there's some concern there. Matter of fact, we're in that IRP that I just mentioned, that plan, they're proposing to double our greenhouse emissions by 2048. So instead of actually decarbonizing our electric grid, they're actually proposing to double the emissions in their current fleet. So that brings me to, what are we going to do about it? Well, we've got 3 solutions, and obviously there's a lot of information that needs to come out of a study. But as it relates to the energy side of things, we want to make sure that a study of the issue would include all the costs and benefits, making sure that we're capturing all the environmental impact as well as the economic development benefits that may accrue from this industry. We want to make sure that we are still able to meet that demand with carbon-free energy. And a lot of this, I would just want to point out, the industry may, is going to have to be a part of this solution for this, and I think that they are beginning to realize that things need to be done on their side of things to assure us that we're able to meet our goals with regard to carbon-free energy. Next, consider larger industry trends. We want to make sure that those analyses not only capture energy efficiencies by the industry that may be coming online in the next 10 to 20 years, but also looking at increased use due to AI and whether or not existing facilities are actually going to see load increases because of densification of racks. And that's a really fancy term of just saying putting more data in the existing building. Second recommendation, we would like to see more of a state oversight and review for some of the regional impacts related to data centers. Now, mostly when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about water withdrawal for cooling, but there are other regional impacts that we would want the state to kind of take a look at, because honestly, localities are not really educated on these issues and are not necessarily looking out for the Commonwealth's goals when it's making a local land use decision. And lastly, it's that protection from cost shift. We need to make sure that the right user is paying for this infrastructure, and that any increase in bills from that doubling of demand, if that is what it in fact turns out to be, is not borne by residential customers, by families and small businesses of the Commonwealth. So that's our paper, and happy to take questions, and I'll turn it over to Blair now.
Yeah, so if you found Dan's presentation moderately triggering because, oh my God, nuclear, guess what? I'm not about to make it better. Let's try to share my screen again. And am I boring anybody with dull numbers, or is this the right one? Because it still says I'm sharing the same screen as the first time.
You're
Great.
good.
My computer's haunting me. So we had a lot of fun this past legislative session, and in part, as much as I love the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of potentially phenomenal technologies, but still very much in the R&D stage technologies, started becoming more and more popular to talk about from both sides of the aisle. And a little bit at the expense of the Clean Economy Act and wind and solar. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. So we decided to write this new paper, Managing Technologies Unproven at Scale. You'll notice how I am very intentionally not calling these advanced technologies or emerging technologies, because to frame these things in that manner would not necessarily be inherently incorrect, but it does not get at the heart of the fact that these technologies are not yet proven, and they are most definitely not yet proven at the commercialized scale that they were being proposed for. And they had been proposed for, as Dan noted, in Dominion's current IRP. So myself, Peter Anderson with App Voices, Will Cleveland with SELC, and Connor Kish with Sierra Club, we were deeply involved with defending against a handful of bills this past session that would have prematurely codified the role that small modular reactors, or what people were trying to codify as advanced nuclear, as well as hydrogen, would play in electricity generation for the Commonwealth underneath the Clean Economies framework. So we wrote a paper this year really trying to evaluate where are the pluses and minuses of these technologies. They are zero carbon if done right. In theory, that means they could definitely play a role. Like I said in the first section of today, the Clean Economy Act already leaves space for not only our existing nuclear facilities, which is 30% approximately of Virginia's electric grid today, but also for new technologies that come onto the scene. We were forward thinking when we wrote this bill. So because we were forward thinking, that means that we should not be prematurely codifying things that don't need to be written into Virginia's code at this really novice stage of the technology. So I've got down here this policy recommendation section, and it came very intentionally based off of the legislation that we saw this past year that we really anticipate coming again. So on the hydrogen side of things, because that's a little bit easier, we had bills like HB 2197 from Kathy Byron, who is retiring, but former chair of House Commerce and Energy, to dictate that hydrogen, and in her bill, it was not defined as to where the hydrogen came from, how it was made, but hydrogen of any form qualified for the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard that is within the Clean Economy Act. And that's just not going to work. From an environmental standpoint, it's really important where hydrogen or how hydrogen is made. And I say where and how because there's a lot of transportation implications as well for depending on where you are manufacturing hydrogen. Hydrogen can definitely potentially play a role in things like aviation or replacing marine diesel, or even as manufacturing feedstock. But the take that we have in our paper is that hydrogen does not actually belong in our homes, and it does not belong in our power sector. There is the possibility that long-term power storage with hydrogen could play a role in the future, but for a lot of reasons, including the fact that the only place where this hydrogen storage is actually working well is in Utah in salt mines, and we don't have any of those here in Virginia. It means that hydrogen is probably not going to play a big role, and at least at this current juncture of where the technology is, should not play a role in Virginia's electricity makeup or being piped into our homes and our buildings. So that's hydrogen, and if you are interested in learning more about the lovely hydrogen rainbow, or if you're interested in learning why my cat likes to close the door behind my head at random times, sorry about that. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to share more resources. We do have a legislative framework essentially for lawmakers to use when hydrogen proposals are put in front of them. But the really sticky part of this past session was on small modular reactors, SMRs. And they're not small, to be clear. I need to stop using the phrase SMR or the term SMR myself because these are not the same size of nuclear reactors that we think of when we're thinking about what is on a nuclear sub. So there's traditional nuclear over here, there's subnuclear over here, and SMRs are sort of here. Micro reactors are what you think of on a sub, and those are in the 20 megawatt range. But the SMR projects that were proposed this past session were, in theory, depending on how you read the language, again, I'm sure I'm triggering Nate, were capped at around 460 megawatts. And they really are about daisy chaining reactors that are approximately 70 megawatts at this juncture in the technology together. And what we saw was legislation to allow for a 10 billion, that is billion with a B, pilot program for utilities, Dominion, to do 3 of these pilot programs, and at the expense of ratepayers, no less. So as we said at the very beginning, the Clean Economy Act already allows for newer technologies that come into play to be a role within the renewable portfolio standard, to play a role in our clean energy transition. What it does not do, however, is utterly smash SEC authority to the point where they have to approve these really unproven technologies. And that is the type of legislation that we saw. A thumb on the scale does not come close to the type of legislation that was being proposed. It was going to force the SEC to approve this pilot program with no protections for ratepayers. And thankfully, we were able to oppose it. Now, to the extent that nuclear will play in our clean energy transition, that is very much, we have 30% of our grid at nuclear now, and those are going to continue for the next 20 to 30 years already. Their licenses have been renewed. But to the extent small modular reactors may or may not play a role, for instance, in data centers, that's TBD. But what they cannot do is impact our ratepayers and have ratepayers bear the expense and risk of this unproven technology. So that's really what this paper is about. It's about proceeding with caution and making sure that lawmakers understand the implications of these unproven technologies before and aren't prematurely codifying the role that they may or may not play in our energy transition. So with that, I believe we're handing things to Jess. Someone tell me if I'm wrong.
Thanks, Blair.
Woo.
Go ahead and share my screen. All right, just a thumbs up. Is that, just want to make sure that's okay, great. Thanks so much. And thanks to Virginia Conservation Network for the opportunity to talk about this issue. I want to say a thank you also to the co-authors for the Preventing Pipeline Harms page, Connor Kish of Sierra Club Virginia chapter, and Dave Sly of Wild Virginia. We know poorly planned and constructed fracked gas pipelines currently harm Virginia's fragile water resources and ecosystems and essentially keep us locked in an energy past. Projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the proposed Virginia Reliability Project perpetuate environmental injustice and hinder us from achieving the clean energy goals of Virginia. The operation of these facilities mean more methane in the air, and that means more serious consequences to the climate. And although Virginia has passed laws to promote clean energy and improve accountability measures, some of which you heard about in previous presentations, new fossil fuel infrastructure projects continue to be licensed and ultimately harm our communities. That means negative public health impacts to water and air, economic harm to farmland and other critical agricultural lands, and a continued contribution to the climate crisis. The most egregious example in Virginia is the Mountain Valley Pipeline. It's an unnecessary fracked gas pipeline pushed on the communities of Southwest Virginia, and its construction has resulted in over 350 violations of water quality law, significant harm to local environments, damage to indigenous cultural and sacred sites, and negative impacts on rural communities and their livelihoods. Mountain Valley Pipeline was poorly routed, poorly designed and constructed, and that resulted in repeated losses of federal permits. One of the newer challenges that we are now seeing is that Mountain Valley Pipeline received unprecedented congressional interference in 2023 by being inserted in an unrelated debt bill called the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The law required the approval and authorization of any missing federal permit and attempted to remove opportunities for judicial review of the project. This sacrifice of Appalachia will increase damage to the region, but it also sets a dangerous precedent for our ability to protect our natural resources and to control our energy future. It highlights that Virginia must do all that it can to protect our water, climate, and communities. New pipeline expansion projects proposed for Eastern Virginia, like the Virginia Reliability Project, also raise concerns about construction through areas overburdened with existing infrastructure and pollution. Of deep concern are the effects on wetlands and private wells, especially in areas prone to recurrent flooding and sea level rise, and potential impacts to the Nansemond River and Great Dismal Swamp. All of these made worse by the climate crisis. So where do we go from here in terms of solutions? We know that new fossil fuel energy is not what Virginia needs to ensure a just, equitable, clean energy transition. Fossil fuels are the energy of Virginia's past, not our future. The best solution is pretty simple. Don't build more fossil fuel infrastructure. But absent a ban, any new fossil fuel build-out must be thoroughly and holistically scrutinized. Virginia must also protect and restore communities in areas negatively impacted by existing projects, and the public needs to have a voice. Some of the specific policy recommendations that we came up with this year to address the risks of fossil fuel infrastructure are including bonding and restoration requirements in permit applications for fossil fuel projects. This is not something that is currently happening, and that's an opportunity for us to strengthen safeguards for when a project is built or possibly abandoned. We're also asking for more review by requiring an individual Virginia water protection permit and upland certification, which is under a certain part of state water control law, for pipelines that are 24 inches in diameter and up. Right now, it's over that amount and that require that permit. And a 24-inch fracked gas pipeline is certainly something that needs to be scrutinized. We also recommend prohibiting new fossil fuel construction in areas of karst terrain. That's a specifically fragile type of limestone geology that's in many regions of Virginia, including where Mountain Valley Pipeline is being actively constructed. Damaging those fragile areas can permanently alter or destroy water resources. We also recommend strengthening opportunities for the public to report on-the-ground construction failures to the DEQ. At each stage, there should be ample opportunities for the public voice, and especially for things that are directly impacting them and they have the most on-the-ground knowledge about. Our final recommendation was to require DEQ approval for pipeline variances that are submitted to the federal body that reviews interstate pipelines, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Specifically, requiring DEQ to take a look at any of the variances that would affect Virginia water quality or impact the 401 certification, as allowed by federal law. So these are some of the ways we think we can address the past, present, and potentially future harms from fracked gas pipeline infrastructure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jess, and also Blair and Dan. While we wait to see if there are any questions in the chat on these three papers, I do have a question for Dan about the first policy suggestion. I'm curious about what are the barriers to getting an independent study approved?
So, well, let me start by answering why we would want an independent study. And I think that's, again, there's a lot of interests at play here. Ensuring that we get the correct answers from a party that is not involved in this conversation, I think is very important. And this is not something new. We've done this before in past studies. Matter of fact, I can think of two where we actually contracted with the National Academy of Sciences, and one of which was the uranium mining fight. We had a uranium mining study here in Virginia. NAS was able to provide that service, and the most recent would probably be the gold mining discussion, for which Jess is very familiar with, in which, again, NAS was contracted to help handle that. So finding that independent body, again, I have been very open about who that would be, not saying that would be NAS in this case, but we just want to make sure that those that are actually debating this topic and doing the research are fair and arbiters of the conversation. So.
Thank you. So we will move on to our next section, our last section, which is renewable energy and energy efficiency. First, we'll have Ashish Kapoor with Piedmont Environmental Council speak to powering progress through rooftop solar and to expanding access to community solar. Ashish will be followed by Eileen Woll from the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, who will present on maximizing offshore wind generation. And lastly, we'll have Lena Lewis with the Nature Conservancy to discuss cutting energy bills and air pollution with energy efficiency. So I will pass it to you now, Ashish.
Thanks so much, Lillian. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can y'all see that? Great. So the first of two papers I'll be talking about is Powering Progress with Rooftop Solar. This was written by myself, Josephus Almond at SELC, and McKenna Dunbar at Sierra Club, Virginia. So benefits of rooftop solar. First is it connects directly to the distribution grid, less need for transmission. You know, some folks have talked about the increased demand for energy throughout the Commonwealth. With that will also come more transmission. So the more distributed energy that we can have, whether that's rooftop or later I'll talk about community solar, the less transmission that we would need. That also allows us to avoid the queue. There's, you know, in Virginia itself, a significant amount of utility scale solar, and in the PJM greater grid, over 100 gigawatts of solar that's in the interconnection queue with PJM, and the typical wait time there is 5 to 7 years. So with distributed generation, we're allowed to connect to the grid renewable energy more quickly. And that's important, you know, as we've talked about, and as Dan mentioned, increasing demand from data centers is now creating this gap in which we're now having to take, you know, retired coal plants that were supposed to be retired and keep them online, and building peaker plants and so forth. This is a way to bring renewable energy to the grid more quickly and then fill in that demand gap. It also limits the land and environment.
If
Yeah.
you could reshare your screen, we're only seeing the title slide.
Really?
Yes. It's not full screen.
Okay, let's see. Maybe it's the other side that's showing. How's that?
Now we can see.
Now you can see. Okay. Shared the wrong screen there. All right. So where was I? So yeah, so it limits the land and environmental impacts. You're building it on roofs that are already built, of course. So you're lessening that need to build on land. Ratepayer savings, so protecting yourself both now, you know, from the energy rates, and then future energy increases by the utility. You're insulating yourself from those too as a consumer. Decentralizing the grid and increasing resilience is another great benefit of distributed generation rooftop solar, particularly when paired with batteries. You can get energy independence if the grid goes down, but just as importantly, it allows for peak load management in the future. If Virginia were to start incentivizing solar systems with batteries to discharge portions of the energy from the battery to the grid to help, you know, alleviate those peak load demands, then again, that's that much less need for carbon emitting fuels to close that gap. So an innovative and comprehensive energy policy can really address that. Challenges. So I'll start with the state level incentives. There really are none right now. So we have the federal tax incentive of 30%, nothing at the state level to incentivize and close that financial burden for getting rooftop solar. It does typically require access to upfront capital. So that can also be something that inhibits its wide scale adoption. It is more expensive per megawatt than utility scale solar. It's still cheaper than any other form of energy, but in a pure financial cost analysis, it is more expensive than utility scale. There is a statutory cap on distributed generation in the Commonwealth that's 6% of the previous year's peak load, and then sort of another part of that restriction in terms of growth is the PPA cap. PPAs are power purchase agreements, so that's, you know, ultimately the developer is buying the system and installing the system and paying for all that, and then the consumer is signing a contract to purchase energy off of that system. So that's capped at 500 megawatts right now, which is not a very high number, and that includes rooftop and community. And then there's limited accessibility there for PPAs, so really for low-income customers, and then for larger scale users such as schools and commercial uses. And lastly, school solar can be difficult due to the aging building infrastructure, and even new schools sometimes are built, believe it or not, that are just not really ideal for solar, and so there needs to be some comprehensive policy on that note. Policy solutions. First is the GGRF, that's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, has around $27 billion worth of funding, and the Solar for All program has $7 billion available. So myself and our organization, as well as SELC and Sierra Club, have supported this application from Virginia Energy to apply for the Solar for All program. This will increase access to solar for low-income communities, expanding both access and the cap for solar PPAs. As I mentioned before, there's a cap on how many PPAs there can be, and we'd like to see that cap expanded. A couple ways to finance systems that are sort of alternative and don't require upfront payment or RPACE, similar to CPACE, that's residential property assessed clean energy. So that's really using your property tax, increasing your property tax payments to pay for your solar, and then that slides over if you were to sell your building, so you don't need to actually take out a loan. And somewhat similarly, and has been very effective in other states, is on-bill financing. That's having the utility buy the system, and you basically finance it through your utility bill, so you get the savings directly, and again, don't have to take out a separate loan. Adoption of solar-ready school roofs and net zero designs, an increase in the net metering cap, and lastly, a state-level investment tax credit that helps close some of the gap, even if it's just on the equipment, that's been shown to be effective in other regions. So now I will slide over to expanding access to community solar. And this was a paper that was written by myself, as well as Peter Anderson and App Voices, and Josephus Almond at SELC. Oops. Okay, so benefits of community solar, also known as shared solar. Ultimately, shared solar is a centralized solar facility capped at 5 megawatts that users can pay into and take advantage of clean power. So this is an affordable option for those who can't secure a rooftop. It could be logistics, an old roof, shade, your building itself doesn't allow it. It could be, just access to finances, and not being able to pay for a system on your own roof. This allows you to buy energy from a off-site facility. So these are smaller projects than utility scale, and oftentimes these can get more buy-in in some communities. These are, typically 30 to 50 acres. They can also be placed on closed landfill sites, brownfields, even parking lots. So it has less of that cumulative land impact. And much like rooftop solar, you can bypass a lot of the interconnection backlog with PJM. And again, you're able to fill in that demand gap with more renewables and have less reliance on increased gas and coal. And again, less land impacts, less transmission required that connects directly to the distribution grid. So typically you don't have the need to build out a large substation, and there's no additional need for transmission lines. And it tends to be a more equitable solution. One, you're getting more access for folks that don't have the upfront capital to put solar on their own home. And these facilities do often employ, they estimate, around 10 times more folks from the community than larger scale solar. So it can be a way to have a more equitable impact on the surrounding community. Challenges right now, it's only available through Dominion and Old Dominion. And for those folks, it's capped at 200 megawatts. So again, not a very high number, which limits the sort of proliferation of community solar. There's also a high minimum bill of $55 and really just a boatload of interconnection processes that can sometimes make these projects untenable due to infrastructure costs that are required by the utility, dark fiber upgrades and so forth that can really range into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's currently being sussed out with the SCC cases, both retroactively and moving forward, but that remains a hurdle. And not available with APCO's 500,000 plus customers. So that is a customer base that's really missing out on the benefits of community solar. Then lastly, I just briefly mentioned the cost shift arguments that have often been used. to challenge community solar and rooftop solar, that folks that don't have solar have to bear the burden and the cost for the distributed grid upgrades. But this has not been proven, and utilities have not been able to really demonstrate that in SCC cases. And so lastly, I will do policy solutions for community solar. One is to incentivize parking lots, brownfields, and farms. Parking lots and brownfields in particular, on a pure cost basis, tend to cost around 50 to 100% more than your utility scale solar site. So there is a need with a comprehensive state policy to close that financial gap, to encourage more investment in these systems, and think about the net benefit that can come from building community solar on land that's already been built. Reducing that minimum bill that I mentioned earlier to increase the economic benefits for those who subscribe to community solar. Expanding shared solar into APCO's territory is another thing that we would like to see. Agrivoltaics trials in conjunction with community solar. Agrivoltaics are, essentially being able to grow some sort of crop in conjunction with solar. And we would like to see more of that within the Virginia climate and the Virginia crop availability, and see what works and what doesn't, and what its efficacy could be moving forward. A streamlined interconnection process that shifts disproportionate costs from initial developers, reviewing multiple projects at once, so that the first developer of community solar in a certain site doesn't need to take on all of those dark fiber costs and infrastructure upgrades costs that can really kill a project, and allowing that in other projects to be reviewed simultaneously. Assisting in a model ordinance development for both rooftop, but particularly community solar, as more localities are kind of drilling down on the specifics of solar ordinances, restrictions, and allowances. More sort of model guidance on community solar. And lastly, the $35 million for the existing Virginia Brownfield and Coal Mine Renewable Energy Grant Fund and Program would go a long way in encouraging more solar on brownfields, particularly in Southwest Virginia. And that is my contact information. If you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, my email and phone number is listed there. And with that, I will pass it on to Eileen, who will talk about wind. I can stop sharing, or somebody can help me stop sharing. I think I got it.
Great, thank you. I am Eileen Woll, author of the Maximizing Offshore Wind Generation paper, and I want to thank you all for this opportunity to speak about the very exciting subject of offshore wind. Next slide, please. So the opportunities with Virginia offshore wind are huge. It has the potential to deliver upwards of 30% of Virginia's 100% clean energy goals. First, we have the CVOW project, the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, which is on time. Dominion will start construction in the next few months and deliver that 2,600 megawatts to the grid by the end of 2026. Another active lease we have that will be delivering power to Virginia, to the grid via Virginia, is the 3,000 megawatt Kitty Hawk project. That is off the coast of North Carolina. It's only about 27 miles south of the CVOW project. The feds are also planning to hold for auction in mid next year an area that's called, and labeled on this map here, as Call Area C, that is adjacent to the Dominion CVOW project. There's also Call Area D, which is adjacent to the Kitty Hawk project. That hopefully it was eliminated in this particular round, but we're hopeful that the feds will be offering that to for leasing in the next 1 or 2 years. So totaling these four, both the active and the planned lease areas, we easily have between 8 to 10 gigawatts, and we would suggest highly that we can and should increase what's in our public interest. Right now, our public interest goals are a measly 5,200 megawatts. All the other coasts, all the other East Coast states have public interest or goals much, much higher than that. So it really would behoove Virginia to up that public interest goal. Next slide. And the challenges with offshore wind are very complicated, and they more or less stem from the fact that Virginia has a regulated utility market, and that CVOW is unique in the nation as the only utility developed project. So the model that the states in the north to us can otherwise use have procurement commitments that support a competitive process that materializes in power purchase agreements, PPAs, with maximum benefits to both the state and to its electric consumers. And with an eye to satisfying the 5,200 that is in the public interest allowance within the VCEA, Dominion is very seriously interested in adding to that 2,600 megawatt CVOW 1 with what they're already terming to be CVOW 2 with another 2,600 megawatts from that call area C. They should they win that auction next year, it really essentially is a deja vu all over again, where Dominion will again be coming to the State Corporation Commission for approval of yet another multi-billion-dollar project with those costs passed on to ratepayers. Next slide. So our policy recommendations, the first one will probably not too realistic for this next session, given the political environment that we're in, but we do want to have a placeholder of recommending the increasing of amount of offshore wind that is deemed in the public interest from the 5,200s to anywhere between 8 and 10 megawatts or gigawatts by 2030. The other two policy recommendations are very real for 2024. First is to require that the second tranche, the second area of CVOW of the coastal Virginia area be subject to a competitive procurement process. And second, to require that Dominion issue a competitive solicitation to contract or to purchase the output of any offshore wind facility currently not under development. There is already a lot of interest in this, including from the governor's office. He had suggested in some amendments last year for this to make it more competitive and to offer the utility more options offer the utility more options for lower cost contracts to help lower future costs for the Virginia ratepayer and reduce their risk exposure. And there's also concern that offshore wind developers are hesitant to purchase, or lease those areas, those future lease areas off the coast of Virginia because of our current policy blocks possible paths to market for them. These recommendations would otherwise open up these paths to market and make Virginia more competitive for investment from the offshore wind industry. That is it. Available to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Eileen. And we'll toss it over to Lena for our last paper on cutting energy bills and air pollution with energy efficiency.
Hi, everybody. Get my slides up. All right, so I am going to talk with you about energy efficiency. My name is Lena Lewis with the Nature Conservancy, and my co-authors are Laura Gonzalez with Clean Virginia, Blair St. Ledger-Olson with Climate Cabinet, and Mary Stewart Torbeck with Sierra Club. And energy efficiency, it makes everything that you've heard from all of our other speakers easier to achieve. And when I'm talking about energy efficiency, here are some examples on the screen of some things that qualify as energy efficiency. And the things in the left column are lower cost and relatively easy to do. And then the things in the second column get a little bit more expensive. So the question that I have for you is, think through the things on this list. Which of the things do you already have done in your home? And for the things which aren't in your home yet, think for a sec about why not. Maybe there's something on this list that you could get done this weekend. And if not, there might be a legitimate reason why not. There are barriers to implementing energy efficiency in our homes and businesses. And that's why energy efficiency is something that we deal with in state policy. But energy efficiency has so many benefits for the environment. The cleanest energy is the energy that we never produce in the first place. And it also lowers energy bills, and making all these things happen, if you don't do it yourself, creates lots of local jobs. So the challenges to energy efficiency, a big one is upfront cost. Even though energy efficiency is a wonderful investment to make, it ends up saving a lot of money in the long run or even in the short run. So in addition to upfront cost, if you are a renter and you pay your own electricity bill, your landlord may not have any reason to invest in energy efficiency because the landlord is not going to see the benefits of lower energy bills. And another barrier is that our utilities are set up to profit from building more power plants. So they don't have as much incentive to help customers with energy efficiency. There are other challenges too, but these are the ones I want to focus on. So here is the old model for utilities in terms of what their role is. And that is, as consumer demand for electricity goes up, the blue rectangle, it's the role of the utility company to increase electricity generation to exactly meet electricity demand. And everything that they pay for, we as ratepayers pay for as well. And plus, because utilities are earning a profit on everything as well. So the new utility model is that in addition to supplying electricity generation, utilities are also providing energy efficiency programs to help customers lower demand so that they don't have to generate as much electricity. And it is cheaper for utility companies to help customers become more energy efficient than it is for utility companies to build out new power generation. So this new model already exists in law to some extent, and that is the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, the EERS. And this is something that we got passed through bipartisan support. There was bipartisan support for this. This is mandatory energy savings targets for Dominion and Appalachian Power, and they do earn profit on the energy efficiency programs that they provide for customers. And these programs must be cost effective. They must be cheaper than providing the same amount of generated energy. And these targets are here on the graph to the right. You can see that the targets for energy savings through energy efficiency go up every year. But then in 2026, we don't know what happens. The SEC is going to provide new targets, and it's a big question what they're going to provide. So one of our policy goals then is to ensure that the targets after 2025 continue to go up and that the utilities actually meet those targets for energy savings instead of energy generation. And then something else we're interested in is called inclusive utility investment. And this is where the utility pays the upfront cost of an energy efficiency upgrade for a customer. Or it could also be the utility paying upfront costs for a solar panel to go on a customer's roof, or for energy storage for a customer. And then the utility company puts monthly charges on the customer's bill for the customer to pay the utility back. However, the customer is immediately saving money on lower energy costs, and the amount that the customer is saving is more than the utility is putting on their monthly charge. So the customer is immediately seeing financial benefits. So this is another possibility that we would like to see supported as well. There's so much more that could be said about energy efficiency, but these are the two things that we'd like to focus on this year. And here is my contact information, nice and big.
Great. Thank you so much, Lena. And I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. So
I'm trying to figure out how to stop sharing. There we go. Okay, there we go.
There we go. So we'll start with this question might be best jointly answered by Ashish and Dan, if Dan's still on the call. The question is, the giant flat roofs of data centers would seem perfect for solar. What are the prospects and challenges of encouraging solar on data centers? So I'll open this up to Ashish and Dan and any other author or speaker who wants to touch on it.
Sure. Yeah. I think HVAC systems, the type of roof that's often used in data centers doesn't always allow for maximum implementation of solar, but certainly it's an option. You could, estimates say you could get about 5 to 10% of a data center's energy. That gives you an idea of how much electricity they use. But certainly, there is some room for some solar development there, and they have relatively small parking lots because there's not a lot of folks that actually end up working within the data centers, but that's also another possibility. So, 10% of a lot is still a lot. So there is, I think, some room for development there, as well as on the generator side. A lot of these data centers in Loudoun County have tier 2 generators, are pretty filthy. They have almost 12 gigawatts of those in that vicinity. So tier 4 generators, a lot cleaner, and that would be another way that they can decrease their fossil fuel impacts.
Thank you, Ashish. I'm also seeing a question about, looks like building electrification. There's a major benefit in shifting from fossil fuel gas used for heating and cooking to all electric housing. What are the obstacles to undertaking this transition in Virginia?
One of the obstacles is that, we talked about utility energy efficiency programs from the electric utilities. They have been hesitant to offer programs that involve fuel switching, like helping customers switch out their gas-powered furnaces for electric-powered heat pumps, because they point to code and they point to precedents in the SEC that says they're not allowed to do that. And it's unclear, honestly, whether that is the case or not. Those of us who advocate for beneficial electrification say the code does not prevent them from doing this, but they say that it does. We are optimistic that we're going to make headway on clarifying that very soon. So hopefully in that department, that'll get cleared up and we will be able to see some beneficial electrification through utility programs. And I'd maybe turn it over to others to talk about other ways we can do beneficial electrification.
I won't talk too much about it, but I think I'm on it. There is another paper, and I'm just gonna throw it in the chat. It's not pretty, called Making Buildings Cleaner and Safer, that talks about building electrification and where we need to go, not just from a renovation and retrofits perspective, but also from a new building construction perspective. And I will let Adriana or Lillian tell you when that webinar is, because I don't know.
I also just want to add that, the Inflation Reduction Act has tons and tons of opportunities for homeowners to get rebates and tax credits for improvements to your homes, both in terms of solar and in terms of energy efficiency upgrades. And that includes switching from gas-powered to heat pumps, both in terms of you're heating your home and in terms of water heaters. So that's fuel switching that you can benefit from. So I encourage you to look at that and, tell all your friends and neighbors, because it's a great conversation topic. They will thank you for talking about it.
Great, thank you both. And thank you everyone for the thoughtful questions, and a huge thank you to our speakers for taking the time to present to us today. And thank you for all the work that you're engaging in. I'm going to pass it off to Andriana to close us out and talk about some of those upcoming webinars. And Andriana, if you could answer the question of when the land use and transportation one with Blair's building paper is happening, that would be great.
Yes, I was just about to, which is great. So there are land use and transportation webinar, which is our last one in the series, will take place on Thursday, November 2nd. It's also from 2 to 3:30. All of our webinars are Thursdays from 2 to 3:30. This one's November 2nd. And Blair, you are an author. The speaker will be McKenna Dunbar for the McKenna Dunbar from Sierra Club for the Making Buildings Cleaner and Safer paper. All right. I'll just give my little roundup. I put all the relevant links in the chat, and I'm also going to share my screen. So some ways that you can get involved with climate energy advocacy moving forward is contacting your legislators. You can find yours at Who's My Legislator. They just cut it off in the link though, virginiageneralassembly.gov. You can also share this recording that will be posted on our YouTube channel either by end of this week or beginning of next week. And you can see through this screenshot that the past webinars, if you haven't seen them and would like to, on land and wildlife conservation and clean water and flood resilience are also there. There's also a sneak peek wrap-up video from our annual meeting and partner retreat, which many people in the audience did attend, and it's just a really fun way to just reflect and look back on. The next thing I'd like to say is a save the date for our General Assembly preview. That will be on Saturday, December 2nd from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. for our in-person watch parties. And these will take place regionally throughout the state. Different locations we're set to launch next week, so keep an eye out for that. And speaking of, okay. And our Common Agenda Education Series webinar is our Good Governance and Budget Training. So this is a nice addition for those who aren't so aware of our good governance issue area. This will tackle topics like environmental equity and also a lot of things about keeping utility companies accountable, everything like that. And what's going to be a little different from the past 3 webinars we've had is that we'll also be including a Budget 101 training on how to impact Virginia state budget, and as well as the entire process of the budget and how you can, like, from point A, B, C, they'll run you through how you can leave a comment and then also change and update the Virginia state budget. For all of our upcoming events and advocacy guides, like our General Assembly 101 guide, we have a virtual civic engagement guide, and also a media guide. You could go to our Take Action page. That's at vcnva.org/takeaction. And that's where I'm going to close off for today. Thank you so much for attending. I hope to see you all in the upcoming webinars. And if you have any questions or concerns about any of the topics that were covered today, please feel free to reach out to our wonderful authors and speakers. We'd love to work with you. Thank you so much, everyone. Great. Have a wonderful day. And thank you, everyone. Bye.